There is shocking information about the Holts who were shown very early in the Shiny Happy People docuseries and introduced as very good friends of Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. In fact, even before Shiny Happy People aired, big trouble was stirring in the Holt household. I wanted to talk about Jim and Bobye Holt a little bit today and give some perspective on their comments, as well as some shocking information about what has happened to them since their interview on Shiny Happy People. My first thought when they came on the screen was, why are they doing an interview in the first place? What is their motive, and what good thing did they expect to come from granting an interview to the producers of Shiny Happy People? Jim Holt was a friend of Jim Bob from 7th grade on.
That family of 8 kids are the Holts. Father Jim has known Jim Bob for years.
Jim Bob Duggar and I grew up together. We went to Shiloh Christian High School together from 7th grade on.
And Jim Holt was one of my dad's friends, one of his best friends.
The Duggars and the Holts were obviously very close friends. Why would the Holts go on a docuseries and bash the Duggars, even if they disagree with things that happened in the past or decisions they made? This struck me as showing very bad character. What good thing would come from doing a negative interview about your former friends? He says that way back when, Jim Bob asked him to bring his family and come and ice skate because they needed some more people to be there for the filming of their show.
Jim Bob said, we need some people there at the ice skating rink at the Jones Center. And so we said, yeah, we'll come there and skate. And then they come up and just stuck the camera in our face right off the bat and said, well, what do you think about this? And I thought, well, what do I do? And so I did a little quick interview, but wished it wasn't done at that time.
And you regret that now?
Yeah, I regret doing that.
If you were there for the filming of a show, wouldn't you expect to have a camera around and possibly be asked questions for the production? But he acts as if he were surprised to be filmed. Why does he regret that? What's wrong with saying they were friends from a young age and had been for many years? It also seems like Bobby is leading the way the answers are going to be given.
I'll let you go
Ladies first.
No, don't do that to me. Go ahead.
You want me to talk for you? Like
No.
Jim and Bobby? Okay, just me.
Just you for you.
Jim Holt.
And I'm Bobby.
So later in that docuseries, the Holts look as though they weren't expecting detailed questions about Josh Duggar's behavior.
When did you first find out about Josh?
Well, how deep do we go? Because that's a rabbit hole. That's, man, it's really twisted.
When speaking about them finding out that Josh had confessed to touching his sisters inappropriately, Jim Holt says this.
So, well, when were you going to tell us? And Michelle said, we weren't going to have them tell you guys at all. We were going to have Josh confess to Kaylee once they were married. And so I asked him, I said, so are you basically saying you were kind of using my daughter as like a carrot to get him to behave the right way? And he goes, well, yeah, kind of.
Of course, we don't really know if this is the way the conversation went or not, but I seriously question that statement. Does it make logical sense to believe Jim Bob would admit, even if it were true, that he was using Mr. Holt's daughter in that way to him? Like he would admit that to Mr. Holt? That does not make sense. I believe if I were able to talk to Jim Bob about how that conversation went, he might have a different perspective on what was said. But clearly Josh's behavior was unacceptable, and the Holts needed to be aware of that before any wedding would take place. So if there was a delay in them being told about it, that was not acceptable. But again, we're only hearing one side of the story here, and it doesn't sound completely accurate to me. Then if you listen to what Jill Duggar says, she makes clear she didn't want anyone to know about what happened with her brother. Not anyone.
Do you remember when he was sent away?
Yeah.
Only what you're comfortable with.
I don't know. I kind of don't really want to talk about all that. Just because, like...
We wish nobody had ever found out about
Yeah,
any
it's
of that.
really hard for me because I'm just like...
There were certain things that like she shared with me in confidence because we were a married couple that with all of our hopes would remain confident between us until we both died and nobody would ever find out about it.
And what's coming up for you?
This is something that like is heavily guarded and
nobody should have ever known about it, so I don't like talking about it.
So, again, thinking about it logically, there may have been a dilemma with the Duggar parents on knowing how to handle this situation. The victims did not want this to be out there at all. So how should they handle it? Should they disregard their daughter's request that it not be told and tell anyway? How could they best both help their daughters and their son? Anyone who thinks through the position of Jim Bob and Michelle would have to see it was a very difficult situation. Trying to figure out what to do under those circumstances would be extremely stressful. I'm not sure I would know exactly what the best route to take would be. Next, Mr. Holt says he confronted Jim Bob about the fact that Josh needs to be turned in for his crimes.
Jim Bob had written a bill that created a sex offender website. I confronted him. I said, Jim Bob, according to your own bill that you've written and what you've told me, your son should be on it. He needs to make it right with the law because he violated the law and he needs to turn himself in. He's like, I'm getting ready to take Josh in. Would you want to go? I said, oh, yeah. So I went right with him. We met at the state trooper's office.
Did Jim Bob balk at that idea? Did he argue? There's no indication that Jim Bob refused or suggested that this wasn't true. He didn't fight the idea at all, according to Mr. Holt himself. He just asked if Jim would want to go with him as they went to turn the situation over to the authorities. So it seems that it is true that Jim Bob was not sure what to do, and when given counsel from a good friend, he took that counsel and he followed his suggestion. But then Jim Holt belittles what happened, saying that the trooper was a friend of Jim Bob.
The state trooper sat down and we told him the story. Josh told him what we thought at the time was everything he had done. He goes, I'm gonna let you go this time. He said, but if you do it again, I'm really gonna come down hard on you. Well, we found out later that this guy was a friend of Jim Bob's.
Now, as I think through this scenario and put myself in Jim Bob's shoes, here I am, a father of a son that I love and I want desperately to help, full of fear of what may happen to him and my family's reputation as well, not to mention my daughters, who do not want any of this to be made public, and my worry about what trauma they may have gone through. I walk into the office of the authorities with my good friend and my son to try to deal with all of it. I happen to know the trooper who we are confessing all this to. That would be a relief. If I had an option of talking to a trooper I knew personally, or one that was a total stranger, would I want to talk to the one I knew, or would I prefer one I'd never met? Clearly, this seems like a reasonable thing to do, and what any of us would do if we had the option. So again, what is Holt saying here? It didn't count that he turned in his son because the person they talked to was also someone Jim Bob knew personally? After the confession, the Duggars knew they needed to get Josh out of the house and that he needed some kind of help. So they sent him to a place they believed would help bring him to where he should be, and he would be working to help others at the same time.
Jim was considering, what should I do? We got to get him out of the house. Where should we go? Where should we take him?
He took him to Bill Gothard's facility in Little Rock,
which was an IBLP facility for troubled boys.
If you were in the Duggar situation, what would you do? The Holts didn't give any suggestion that would have been better. Instead, they seemed to just say what they did wasn't good enough. It seems to me that was a good idea and a reasonable solution for the time being. What would have been a better solution? Next, the Holts say they brought Josh back for Jim Bob's birthday before the article in Parents Magazine was going to be written. When they brought him back, the Holts complained they didn't turn him in.
He brought him back, and he said he wanted him there for his birthday. It was right before Jim Bob's birthday.
They didn't turn him in. They didn't write a report. They didn't do anything.
Okay, so at this point I'm going, turn him in for what? Write a report about what? What exactly did they expect or think the Duggars should have done at that point? They already turned him in. They already had a report written up before he left. Now what? It seems that the Holts are unhappy with the way things were handled, and that's okay, but what did they expect or think should have been done instead? Later in Shiny Happy People, the Holts suggest that Jim Bob is going to take over IBLP, or the Institute in Basic Life Principles.
Do you think that Jim Bob, in a way, is trying to emulate Bill Gothard?
Oh, definitely. Because Mr. Gothard has been taken out of it, From what my understanding is that Jim Bob and Michelle are now his replacement.
This is another situation that makes me wonder, what in the world were the Shiny Happy People producers thinking? Did they do any research at all? There's been no indication whatsoever that the Duggars were going to take over the leadership of IBLP. That was not even on the table at any time. I spoke directly to a member of the Board of Finance for IBLP. I asked Mr. Gothard and others if this was even a discussion or a possibility. All of them said no, and they have no idea why the Holts would say that. It's another thing in Shiny Happy People that just isn't true at all, yet it's put out there as something that was in the works. No, it's not and never was in the works. We may return later to talk more about the Holts interview on Shiny Happy People in future videos, but it is clear that these two people were presented as a loving and devoted couple, yet that was not actually the case. Shiny Happy People aired in June of 2023, but back in April of that year, the Holt household sadly imploded. Samuel Holt, their son, filed a complaint against his father, Jim Holt, on April 20th. The next day, Bobye Holt was granted an order of protection from her husband on April 21st. In May, a final order of protection was granted, which could have lasted up to 10 years. So even before Shiny Happy People aired, there were clearly some family issues going on in the Holt home that you would never guess from their presentation of togetherness in Shiny Happy People. I hope the Holts work out their differences and reconcile their family. It seems there has been some movement in that direction because in December of 2023, Bobby wrote a letter to the judge. According to the U.S. Sun, on April 29, 2023, Bobby requested to dismiss the order. She wrote, quote, "Jim has shown great strides in getting the help he needs. This info has been shared with me via friends, letters from therapists, paperwork he filed, complying with the order for 8.5 months, never contacted me or been on my property via cameras for proof, and word of mouth from 4 men who have counseled with us separately for the duration, for the purpose of joint therapy." She checked off, "I request the dismissal freely and voluntarily and of my own free will," and "I am no longer in fear of the respondent." She checked those boxes off on the form. The request was approved and the case is now closed. I also hope they will reconcile their friendship with the Duggars because the way the Holts have behaved toward their former friends is really unacceptable, and that lack of propriety and grace that each of them showed could have been part of why they lost trust and respect for each other. A true friend would never go on national television and bash the other person, even if they have differences with them. A true friend would be there for you when you're going through the trials and support you in doing the right thing no matter what's happening. The Holts didn't do that. They bailed on the Duggars and then went out in public to bash them. That kind of behavior breaks trust and causes harm to the reputation of the person who does it. The Holts doing that interview made them look bad, and I wonder if the stress and strain from bashing their former friends was also eating away at the trust in their marriage. When someone does not show love and loyalty to their friends, others who are in relationships with them find it hard to hold trust. The restraining order put on Jim Holt by his son Samuel still stands right now as far as I know. Hopefully that will be resolved also. One of the saddest things about this situation is the people online who comment as though Bobby is doing the wrong thing to try to reconcile her family and forgive her husband. I know there are situations that it is never safe to allow the man back into the home because of his continual lack of effort to make necessary changes and his propensity for physical violence. I know there are women who allow them back and disaster happens. But if you look at Bobby's main concern in the matter, it was that Jim would confront her grown son Samuel and her about his order of protection request in front of their minor children. And she didn't want them to be emotionally harmed from witnessing that kind of confrontational behavior. She said he had been physical before with teen children who are all grown now, but never with younger children. According to the U.S. Sun, Bobby's order of protection stated, I believe now that my adult son has filed charges against his father, and I feel that my husband would confront me in the presence of my minor children, even though he hasn't been physical with our minor children to my knowledge. I do not feel it is healthy for them to witness this form of confrontation between myself and my husband. So clearly the concern Bobby had was about Jim's behavior emotionally damaging their younger children. This kind of concern is a valid one, but should also be open to the idea that Jim could get help with his anger issues, and it is reasonable to hope for a reconciliation if he does comply with the order and work with counselors. It isn't that she was afraid he would physically harm her or her young children in the home. Do those online believe a family should be permanently torn apart and never reconciled when there is a problem like this? That forgiveness is a bad thing? Shouldn't the goal be to get help for them and that eventually their family would be restored? In this case, I believe Bobby is doing the right thing to try to reconcile her family. And I hope she and Jim Holt will work to restore their friendship with the Duggars by apologizing for their slanderous interview on Shiny Happy People. And again, I ask, what good did any of this do? Next time, are Jill and Ginger Duggar unwittingly spreading slander too? I think they are honestly, mistakenly doing so. And I will show you what I mean in the next video. There's a lot more to be revealed, so be sure to subscribe. I'll see you here next time.